Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 234, The Sequence of the Restoration, Part 3. The podcast objectives are reveal the final great awakening of these last days, analyze how blindness came upon the nation of Israel, analyze the role of the Spirit in the restoration, and analyze how the Father has increased the nation of Israel. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. The final great awakening. Now, in the most recent podcast, we continued our analysis of the sequence of the restoration of the nation of Israel. Specifically, we analyzed the second, third, and fourth events associated with this season. Per the timeline below, these events are the rise of the messengers, the dissemination of the message, and the unification of the nation. Here again, these events all occurred approximately during 2000 CE and 2020 CE. And therefore, we are observing these signs as matters of historical fact. Unlike the season we are in and the seasons which are to come, we are not forecasting our interpretation of the prophetic word. On the contrary, we are observing authentic events which transpired in this season and revealing the spiritual basis which caused these events to occur. From now, we must analyze the fifth event in this season, that is, spiritual renaissance, the heart and soul of what has proven to be the final great awakening. Along these lines, it would be appropriate to classify this spiritual event as an awakening as well as a rebirth. Here is why. Although the bones representing the nation of Israel and Ezekiel's vision of the valley of dry bones were not dead, they were very dry. Now, the question is, why were these bones very dry? The answer, the nation of Israel, until the restoration, did not possess life in full in the Spirit. We touched on this reality in prior podcasts. In them, we proved how access to certain facets of the Spirit was reserved for these last days. And thus, all our realities were the same. Prior to the restoration, we were all spiritually capped. That is to say, there was a spiritual level none could attain unto, nor ascend beyond. And this is nothing for us to be ashamed of. The Father designed it this way, and he telegraphed this knowledge limitation to us beforehand. Romans 11:25-27 reads, "For I do not wish you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, lest you should be wise in your own estimation, that blindness in part has come over Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel shall be saved, as it has been written, the deliverer shall come out of Zion, and he shall turn away wickedness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. The blindness we were subjected to. Now, there are many key takeaways from this passage, and they all have to deal with the prophetic event of a spiritual renaissance in these last days. To begin with, Shaul confirms that Israel would be blinded in part. Per the timeline below, this blindness set the stage for the spiritual death witnessed at the beginning of this season. Death in this context does not suggest everyone in the nation of Israel was void of the Spirit. It simply means no one had access to all his faculties. In like manner, death in this context does not suggest the nation of Israel was completely dead. However, the nation was dead in part due to the spiritual blindness that had set in. This is clear to see when we analyze Ezekiel's vision, for he is prophesying on behalf of Yahuwah, saying, "See, I am bringing into you a spirit, and you shall live. I shall put a spirit in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am Yahuwah." Now, here we have our first treasure box in this lesson. Live in this passage means to quicken, to be strong, and in full vigor, to experience the fullness of life. This proves that the bones in Ezekiel's vision, although very dry, were not completely dead. Now, this speaks to a critical point of interest concerning spiritual blindness, which we addressed in podcasts prior to the initiation of this end time series. And as it is supremely relevant to this conversation, I will offer it again at this time. And I ask you to consider it faithfully. There is a point of no return within the disastrous cycle of spiritual blindness, i.e., there is a juncture where those who walk willfully in a state of spiritual blindness will most surely experience spiritual death. Notwithstanding, the blindness experienced by the nation of Israel in these last days should not be classified as willful. Quite the contrary, the blindness that had come upon us was inevitable. It was unavoidable. This is precisely why the nation was restored in the most recent season. It's because we were not willfully following a path of spiritual blindness. Rather, we were victims of a curse inflicted upon us because of our forefathers. And this, my friends, is the first key takeaway from Romans 11, and how the blindness we were subjected to set the stage for the spiritual renaissance we experienced in the first season in these last days. There was no spirit in them. Now, this brings us to the focal key takeaway. That is, the nation of Israel is a spiritual body. We've discussed this before, but I would like to revisit it. Specifically, I would like to harden this conclusion with Ezekiel's vision of the valley of dry bones. Let's talk about the sequence. When Ezekiel prophesied to the dry bones, as he was commanded, there was a noise and a rattling, and then the bones began to come together. Then he looked, and he saw sinews and flesh came upon them, and skin covered them, but there was no spirit in them. Here lies the inflection and perhaps the most critical takeaway from Ezekiel's prophecy. To wit, the nation had come together physically, but alas, there was no spirit in them. Here is why this is important to consider. Life in its purest and truest form is not in our flesh. It is in the spirit of Elohim. For it was not until he breathed the breath of life into man that man became a living soul. This truth speaks to one of the greatest controversies we witnessed during the restoration of the nation. That is, a large portion of those who heard the restoration message were deceived into believing the Father was restoring a physical nation. To wit, these individuals believed the purpose of this season was to awaken and save all the physical offspring of Yaakov, i.e., Israel. And even if some who are of the physical seed are not awakened, they still believe the restoration has a physical focus as opposed to a spiritual focus. Now, here lies the problem. Namely, all the prophets who prophesied concerning the restoration also prophesied concerning the spiritual upgrade that Yahuwah was predetermined to make with specific regards to the remnant of his chosen people. Specifically, Yahuwah pledged to put his spirit within the renewed nation of Israel. In doing so, the spirit of Elohim has now become the preeminent factor within the lives of every man, woman, and child found within this set-apart nation. Ezekiel 36:22-38 reads, "Therefore, say to the house of Israel, thus said the Master Yahuwah, I do not do this for your sake, O house of Israel, but for my set-apart name's sake, which you have profaned among the nations wherever you went. And I shall set apart my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, which you have profaned in their midst. And the nations shall know that I am Yahuwah, declares the Master Yahuwah, when I am set apart in you before their eyes. And I shall take you from among the nations, and I shall gather you out of all lands, and I shall bring you into your own land, and I shall sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. From all your filthiness and from all your idols, I cleanse you. And I shall give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. And I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh, and put my spirit within you. And I shall cause you to walk in my laws and guard my right rulings, and shall do them. And I shall save you from all your uncleanness, and you shall remember your evil ways and your deeds that were not good. And you shall loathe yourselves in your own eyes, for your crookedness and your abominations. Thus said the Master Yahuwah, once again, I shall let the house of Israel inquire of me to do for them. I shall increase their men like a flock, and they shall know that I am Yahuwah. Elohim has increased the nation. Now, it is not a coincidence that this passage directly precedes Ezekiel's vision of the valley of dry bones. In doing so, it testifies to the fact that the restoration is a spiritual event. That is to say, Yahuwah has restored a spiritual nation of set apart people. He did not restore a nation of physical descendants of Jacob who are following the same pattern of disobedience and idolatry as their forefathers. This is clear to see if you understand the purpose of these last days and the spiritual quality of those who have been chosen to participate in the millennial kingdom. It is even clearer to see if you perceive the Father's vision of global righteousness. This vision includes peoples and nations and tongues that are not physically related to the original nation of Israel. My dear friends, flesh and blood is not inheriting the kingdom of heaven, but those who have been transformed into the image and likeness of Yahushua Messiah. For this cause, Elohim has indeed restored a physical seed of Jacob, but not because they are the physical seed of Jacob. He has restored them because they are the spiritual seed of Yahushua Messiah. Not only this, but to confirm his vision of global righteousness, Elohim has increased the nation. He has gathered others to Israel. For the same reason, Israel has been restored. Vis-a-vis, they are also the spiritual seed of Yahushua Messiah. Isaiah 56, 1 through 8 reads, "Thus said Yahuwah, guard right ruling and do righteousness, for near is my deliverance to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who becomes strong in it, guarding the Sabbath lest he profane it, and guarding his hand from doing any evil. And let not the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahuwah speak, saying, Yahuwah has certainly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, look, I am a dry tree. For thus said Yahuwah, to the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahuwah, to serve him and to love the name of Yahuwah, to be his servants, all who guard the Sabbath and not profane it, and are holding on to my covenant. Them I shall bring to my set apart mountain, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. For my house is called a house of prayer for all the peoples. The Master Yahuwah, who gathers the outcasts of Israel, declares, I gather still others to him, beside those who are gathered to him. Now, here is the final word. The restoration was not only for the outcasts of Israel, it was for the outcasts of the world. This is crucial to see, for many who call themselves Israel have attempted to make the restoration about a physical people, while devaluing the Father's global vision of righteousness, which will be manifested within the millennial kingdom. As I have said before, his vision will come to pass. And if you are not spiritually qualified to participate in that kingdom, if you are not the spiritual seed of Yahushua Messiah, being transformed into his image and his likeness, you won't be there. On the contrary, you will die in one of the remaining seasons in these last days, with all who transgress and with all who sin. And you will see how physical DNA cannot save you, for only spiritual transformation will get you in. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 234, The Sequence of the Restoration, Part 3. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 236, The Sequence of the Restoration, Part 4. I will post this podcast on Monday, October 23rd, 2023. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.